everybody, and welcome to the first meeting of the Ghoul Guides Association for 2023. My name is Lauren.
And I'm Mary.
And we are, as always, the Ghoul Guides. Happy New Year, everybody. We are starting out right. We're going to talk about something that is very close to our hearts today, which technically we're talking about two things that are one thing. We're talking about unsolved mysteries, but also about solved mysteries.
Solved unsolved mysteries.
Solved unsolved mysteries. So that's today's episode. How are you, Mary Miscohen, Dr. Mary Miscohen?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It's a new year. Happy New Year, everyone. Also January has the first Friday the 13th of the year, so happy Friday the 13th for all those who celebrated on the day. Doing okay. How are you, Dr. Nixon?
I'm okay. I did realize that we probably should have recorded on Friday the 13th. It would have been really on brand for us. But we did not. Next time. Next time. It's a very apt, it's a very apt day for us. But yeah, I kind of missed it. Although a place in Nottingham was doing £2 donuts and coffee, and they have banging donuts. Shout out to Donuts. Feel free to sponsor us. So I was like, oh yeah, I need to work in the office on Friday.
Definitely need to go in, and it's not for the baked goods.
Yes, definitely needed to. I did play a really fun board game on Friday night that I think that you would love. It was called Horrified, and it was like a game where it's like all classic Hammer horror monsters. So you have to try and like defeat Dracula and the creature from the Black Lagoon, or Frankenstein and the Bride. You have to like go around the village, and then there's all of these like NPCs like Elizabeth in the manor and Renfield who's at the prison, and like you have to try and stop the monsters from taking over the village. It was really, really good fun, and especially because it was all very much inspired by like classic Hammer horror stuff. I think it technically was like a universal game, possibly bought out for the failed Universal Monster. I know technically like they're two things, but they overlap. But yeah, it was really, really good fun. I really enjoyed it. So I might have to introduce you to that one. But
that sounds great.
Yeah, game recommendation for those of you out there that like the Gothic and board games. Because that was really fun. I liked it. And also it's fun to play games where you are working together rather than against each other. Because then we played one where you had to survive the zombie apocalypse by like fucking each other over. And I was ruthless. And I survived. I got on the chopper.
See, I'm not a massive gamer.
You're not a big game fan.
But I will say, like, I recently binged. And when I say binged, I mean, like, literally within, like, a 48-hour period, watched, or maybe less, watched all the episodes of The Traitors.
Oh, yeah, you were telling me about it.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll talk about that as a separate episode once you've seen it. But if you also like The Traitors, then let us know your thoughts, because I have many.
Yeah, because it's basically werewolves. Like you said, it's the game Werewolves meets the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Yeah.
Which, I don't think we need to explain why that's Gothic.
But we will. In a future episode.
God dang it, we will.
We will.
We'll do it anyway. You can't stop us.
But for now,
try.
But for now, let's delve into the unsolved and the world of mysteries.
So if you have had the immense pleasure of following Mary and I for a while, you might know that one of the things that we bonded over is our shared love of things like ghost hunting shows. And one of the ones that I shared with Mary was BuzzFeed Unsolved. We both love BuzzFeed Unsolved. I think we've said this many times before.
I mean, shocker, the Ghoul guys love the Ghoul boys.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, no inspiration there, or just downright
none
theft.
Whatsoever. Copyright infringement. What? Yeah, we love the Ghoul boys, and obviously they do when they were on BuzzFeed Unsolved, obviously they're now on Watcher, they did Unsolved True Crime and Unsolved Supernatural. And whilst the Supernatural was the one that we really like started watching them for, unsolved true crime became something of like a kind of pet passion for both of us, because the thing about unsolved mysteries is there has to be an answer somewhere. And I think this is why unsolved mysteries are so fascinating to us. So what we're going to talk about today is not only why unsolved mysteries are such a huge, I'm going to say genre. I feel like they're their own subgenre now of things like true crime and, you know, the Gothic and horror. But we're also going to talk about a couple of huge high profile mysteries that have been solved. And of course, we're going to talk about them in the context of the Gothic and why they're Gothic, because we know that everyone has talked about these like time and time again.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, like a big distinction, and we'll get into this a bit more, but it's almost like, you know, there's often like two overarching categories of the Gothic, isn't there? There's the supernatural, and then there's the explained supernatural, so the kind of Radcliffean Gothic. And I think that like that is really where like the Gothic kind of comes in to the fore with these unsolved mysteries, because you know that the answer is not a ghost, the answer is not something supernatural, you know it has to be something in our natural world that can be explained, but often it's like a kind of complex puzzle, and you are kind of entering the narrative as, you know, a kind of, you know, wannabe detective as it is, hoping that you can solve the mystery.
And you get that kind of slippage where, because you don't know the answer, whilst if you're skeptical like us, you can say, I categorically don't think it was a ghost or anything supernatural, there is that slippage and that potentiality, sorry. And I know we've said over the last couple of episodes, Gothic potential is something that I think I'm becoming increasingly fascinated by, because it's something that is really relevant to us as like a community, as a current global community on the internet, that you have, you know, things where it just doesn't quite make sense, and the possibility in that gap is immense, because, you know, we're fairly sure it wasn't aliens, we're fairly sure it wasn't ghosts, but we also know there's things about the world that we don't know and that we don't understand. And, you know, we don't know enough about space. We don't know enough about the ocean. We don't know enough about things like genetic memory and, you know, inherited, you know, histories and things like that. And energy, not to sound super woo-woo, we don't fully understand how certain things work. We have working ideologies and theories, but we just don't know. And there's always that little bit in an unsolved mystery that even the most skeptical of you is like, well, I can't, it doesn't make sense. So I cannot say for certain, because it does not make sense. I would put money on it not being supernatural, but I can't prove it's not supernatural any more than someone who believes it's supernatural can prove it is supernatural. And that, I think, that gap that unsolved mysteries leave is what makes it, one, such a popular genre, and two, so Gothic, because the Gothic is all about that potential, that fear, that anxiety. You know, what if it's a secret government plot and not, you know, someone died unexpectedly and it was weird.
And I think this is like really interesting, because I think a lot of people think of the crime genre as being almost like antithetical to Gothic, because in the Gothic you have all this scope for potentiality and mysteries and possibly supernatural explanations, whereas in crime it's always, you know, if you're reading a crime thriller, you know that when you get to the end there's going to be a nice neat kind of explanation of, you know, Poirot getting everyone in a room and sitting everyone down and being like, this person is the killer and here's how he did it. But I think it's always fascinating to think about crime as a genre, as a kind of fictional genre, came out of the Gothic, and it's partly because the Gothic is all about mystery and finding out a solution to a mystery. It's just not always necessarily a crime, although sometimes it is, but it's all tied up with, you know, families and plots, and sometimes government conspiracies, but sometimes things more conspicuous, and I think especially when it comes to unsolved mysteries, it's just basically as if you're reading a book, but that final chapter, either the bit at the end of a Radcliffe novel where you find out what exactly Montoni was doing, and there's no ghosts, but this is what happens with Emily, has been
or
taken out, and
the Marquis actually a murderer, and you found out that you didn't know that Adeline's father wasn't her father, but now you know this is a father and also dead. There is no ghost, but there is this horrendous crime.
And there's this kind of impetus when when you're discovering an unsolved mystery and finding out, and you get to that point and you're like, but this is the point in a novel where I would have that concluding chapter that would wrap everything up. But up until that point, what you have are a series of clues, and you, the reader, or you, the kind of person who is engaging with this this real crime, this real unsolved mystery, are kind of propelled to look for more, what are other people saying about it, because you want to continue the narrative to get to that kind of solved conclusion.
And the thing about the DB Cooper documentary on Netflix did quite a good job of showing this, that in the same way that the Gothic prioritizes the reader's experience, unsolved mysteries work in the same way, where the individual is able to get hyper involved, because technically anyone has the right, anybody has the ability, you don't know whose theory could be right, and the answer has to be out there somewhere. That's the thing that makes it such a personal experience. I don't like unanswered questions. One of the things that really sparks my, multiple mental health problems that I will not talk about on this show. But one of the things that really sparks that is unanswered questions. Will the universe keep growing? When will the sun explode? Those, some things that we do know, some things that we don't know. How deep is the ocean? What's down there? There's a level of, that is knowledge that we will never be able to attain. We'll probably never know what happens after you die. There is that thing of I cannot answer that question. I think the thing that people love about unsolved mysteries is the same thing they love about the Gothic, and that's that there is a potential answer. Even if, the Gothic also leaves so much ambiguity, in the Gothic. How many times does a horror movie end and there's a hint that maybe the demons possessed somebody else, or they haven't really answered the question? There's that thing of oh my God, there could be more. But that the solution or the answer is possible. If an unsolved mystery exists, the answer exists somewhere. The answer is possible. It's potential. So I think that's the thing about unsolved mysteries, is that people are super drawn to them because the answer, to quote the X-Files, the truth is out there. The answer is out there somewhere. We will be able to discover this.
I think, all of that. And I think what's also really fascinating is that, like the Gothic, unsolved mysteries invite you in, because there's this idea that maybe you can help solve it.
Maybe you're the individual.
And let's be honest, most of us are not going to go and solve one of these unsolved mysteries, but that possibility is there. So with Gothic narratives, you have unreliable narrators, or kind of fragments of narratives that you need to piece together, like in Dracula, or you're reading a real manuscript, and there's this very kind of real kind of imaginative construct that you are a part of this narrative and this textual world as well. And it's like that with unsolved mysteries, and you get it often where there will be appeals for information, and those kinds of appeals, especially in the kind of new technological era of the internet, have just kind of expanded so much, because that potential is there, that maybe you will notice something looking through an archive in your spare time, or looking on Google Maps and just finding something that someone didn't think was taken, or just that kind of little piece that will add to solving the mystery.
if you've ever watched Unsolved Mysteries, which has just been rebooted over the last few years on Netflix, so the OG Unsolved kind of, and that's what BuzzFeed Unsolved is riffing off of, has the very famous narration, which is, you know, in the deep voice. They always put something up at the end, like if you have any information. And one of the things that is always so fascinating about Unsolved Mysteries is that tips flood in. And obviously that can cause a massive issue for a police force. It can cause a massive issue for a detective who is, you know, trying to wade through what is legit and what is not legit. But what's really interesting is that sometimes it does spark someone's memory, or it does lead to something. And the same thing happens. I mean, we always joke about this. So like, Mary and I call it my like autistic precognition, because I'm shit at maths, but my pattern recognition is fantastic. So I'll often be like, I think this thing is going to happen. I can't tell you why. I just have a real feeling that this thing is going to happen, and it happens. And we always joke about it, don't we? That like, if we were alive like 700 years ago, I'd either be the oracle, well, more than that, but I'd either be the oracle at Delphi or would not have made it this long and would have been burnt.
Yeah.
But there is that thing of like, when people are like, I'm psychic, or I've like, often that information does actually lead to a possible like actual clue or lead. Now, I don't believe those people are psychic. I believe that a lot of them think they are, but I believe it's probably pattern recognition. It's a very high level of empathy or of memory recall that helps people put things together in a way. Because sometimes you have a real bad feeling about something, and that bad feeling turns out to be true. It's probably genetic memory and pattern recognition working on a level we can't understand, but that, you know, Susan from Ohio could be the key to solving this 40-year-old unsolved mystery. And that, I think, that possibility that you could be the one to solve this case, and you could be the one, like, that's the same thing that the Gothic invites, that, you know, a lot of the heroes and heroines of the Gothic post 18th century are very normal. So yeah, like the crime genre goes back to Wilkie Collins, The Woman in White and the Moonstone, this idea of a mystery novel. Like, this is pre-police force. He's the main character in Woman in White is just some dude who happens to have the knowledge to piece things together. And you know, there's always a lot of circumstance and a lot of serendipity in these texts that we as modern readers particularly often kind of go, oh, well, that's unrealistic. But then we look at the world and we see how serendipity works, and how a chance encounter or a chance recognition leads to the capture of a serial killer, or leads to the discovery of, you know, something amazing. And that's what the Gothic kind of suggests, that you could be that mundane individual that just happened to be walking down the road or happened to spot something on that thing. I think that's why Unsolved Mysteries loops in and links in. And the same as with the Gothic, where you've got the explained Gothic and the supernatural Gothic. You have almost these two camps of like, there must be a rational explanation for this, and there is a supernatural possibility for this. And even those of us that are super skeptic are intrigued as to what people think the supernatural, like, I am still so fascinated to know what people think the supernatural explanation is. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, I can't explain how this person who claimed to be psychic knew all of this information, or how this thing kept happening that seems to be supernatural. I don't think it was supernatural, but it happened. Like, and I can't tell you why.
I mean, I will also just add that as someone who is a fan of Darren Brown and who has been to his shows, I will say that, like, I mean, people can do things, humans can do things, and cold reading, or like you said, pattern recognition or suggestion, they're all really powerful. And I think sometimes people underestimate how powerful they can be.
And I think it depends how the individual decides to interpret, or how they're socialized. Like, some people are, you know, socialized very differently. Like, I imagine if we grew up in Louisiana, or we grew up in, you know, the Midwest, or even if we grew up in like Norfolk or Cornwall or Scotland, somewhere where there's a much richer like folklore, we come from two very like metropolitan, industrialized, modern areas, and like your family's religious, mine less so, but we've both been socialized in this very secular, science focused, you know, society, so we interpret everything through that lens. Unsolved Mystery, I think, does in the same way as the Gothic allow lots of people from lots of different perspectives to come together in a way that actually, you know, we're all interested. Like, we all love, like we said in the cryptid episode, we all love cryptids. Some of us think cryptids are real, some of us don't think cryptids are real. Some of us are fascinated in how cryptids came to be. Some of us are fascinated in what people have made up of cryptids. We see things like creepypastas come to fruition. The people that believe in the cryptids and the people that just are interested in the idea of the cryptid, they're not at war with each other. They're not, I mean, the internet exists, so people are arguing, but the Gothic allows that multiplicity, and you can exist together as people who like the same thing, but for kind of different, almost polar opposite reasons.
Yeah, and I think as well, and we will get into this like in future episodes that we do on true crime, but I think that unsolved mysteries do fall under this category of true crime, but I think that
I agree.
I think they are distinct from other kinds of true crime genres in that often unsolved mysteries, there will be an active investigation. It might be kind of put on hold for the moment, but there is an active investigation, and there is often calls for information associated with that. And I think it again, with that kind of invitation, it invites people. Talking about unsolved mysteries is good because it keeps that mystery, you know, in the public consciousness, and it might just ignite somebody's, you know, remembering something, and the discovery of a clue, which is always really helpful. And, you know, again, it's the discussion is interesting on an individual level when it comes to thinking about these kind of unsolved mysteries, like Gothic narratives, where you want to find them and you want to talk about what the answer is, but they also do have a kind of, you know, bigger picture thing where you are helping to potentially, it's very unlikely that you will, but, you know, you're helping to that, or you're trying to at least help to solve the crime,
and
or to solve the mystery.
There are a few instances where internet sleuths and groups of, so for example, the Netflix documentary Don't Fuck with Cats. Now the problem with that is that people that watch Don't Fuck with Cats then were like, if they can do it, I can do it too. And it did have negative ramifications, but essentially a group of internet sleuths managed to track down an individual. And this is also what's really I think fascinates people about unsolved mysteries. They were looking for this guy for a specific reason, because they thought that he was committing animal abuse. And as they looked into him, they started to realize that he could possibly have also been a murderer, or if not, at least like an abuser. And through this investigation, not only did they solve the original question, they uncovered something darker and something deeper. And that's the other thing about unsolved mysteries. And this is why things like DB Cooper, things like the Dalatov Pass, we talked about this in the cryptid episode, there's this possibility, you know, things like one of the greatest examples is like Area 51 and Roswell. Something funky happened. We don't know what it is. It's closely linked to the American military and to the government. Is it a weather balloon? Was it something more sinister? Was it aliens? We don't know. But it was something that someone doesn't want us to know about. And that makes people go, well, there's something bigger there. And if I uncover this thing, then maybe I will learn more. This is why people are obsessed with the JFK assassination. And like, technically that's a solved mystery, but it doesn't make sense to people. And it's linked to so many other things, like, was Marilyn Monroe on an FBI watch list? Was it something more than the fact she was married to Arthur Clarke? Like, people are like, well, if I can figure this thing out, it might lead to something more. It might lead to something darker, because as we're going to talk about in a minute, you get things like, oh, spies and secret government plots. And obviously that also leads to people being like, it's the Illuminati. And we will do an episode one day about the Illuminati, because it's very similar to the Hellfire Club.
Yeah.
It's very funny, very interesting. But there is this kind of like sliding scale. But it also is that thing of like, it's that natural thirst for knowledge. And the Gothic in its very earliest stages was about the natural thirst for knowledge. The desire of Emily St. Aubert to discover what Montoni's doing and what's behind the black veil is exactly the same as me being like, how the frick, like, where did DB Cooper go? Where did the B come from in his name? Where did the money go? Who was he? You know, like, why did the hikers and the Dalatov pass? I know I'm not saying that right. Like, you know, something happened to them. Was it weird hypothermia? Was it radiation? Did they have food poisoning? Did they eat some weird mushrooms? You know, there's a possibility it's something really mundane. There's also a possibility it's something really huge. That's the same thing that the Gothic heroine is doing. And that when you read the Gothic, you are being intentionally placed by the writer alongside the heroine. Your thirst for knowledge as reader is prioritized along with the heroes or the heroines. And that's what Unsolved Mysteries do for us. I think that's why they scratch our brains in the way that they do, because they real scratch my brain.
Yeah, no, it's exactly the same. And it's that whole, you know, you need to know and like, yes, the JFK like assassination is technically unsolved, but like, do we as the public know? No, I don't
exactly
think that information is classified. And I think whether things are classified or whether they're just genuinely unsolved, there's that, like you said, that thirst for knowledge and the need to know.
Yeah, because like, I wouldn't call myself a conspiracy theorist, but do I think something dodgy went on with that assassination? Yeah, I do. Like, I don't think that makes me on par with like a QAnon supporter. And that's that kind of like real fascination. But sometimes unsolved mysteries get solved. And what is really interesting is, if you had told me back in 2005, when my grandma was making our family tree on ancestry.com, if you had told me that one day people's fascination with tracing their ancestry would lead us to not only catching multiple notorious serial killers, but uncovering some of the truths behind some of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the 20th and 21st century, I probably would have laughed.
Okay.
But that's what's happened.
This is perfect then. Shall we get into like talking about, you know, I think we've had a really great discussion about why unsolved mysteries are Gothic, but now let's actually talk about some really famous like unsolved mysteries that are now solved. Yeah. Yeah.
And it is really interesting because what I will say is about three huge unsolved mysteries have just been partially solved. And those cases are known as the Lady of the Dunes, the Boy in the Box, and the Somerton Man. 2 in the US, 1 in Australia. We're going to be talking about the Boy in the Box and the Somerton Man because they're 2 of our favorites. But for example, with the Lady of the Dunes, who was discovered on a beach in the 70s, face down, murdered. They know who she is now. They still don't know what happened to her and how she got there. It's allowed them to go on certain leads and stuff, but like, for example, it doesn't necessarily disprove or prove certain theories. So one of the theories about the Lady of the Dunes that I just want to mention, because I always think it's fascinating, is that she was possibly an extra in Jaws. There's this like, is it 70s or 80s? I can't remember. I didn't do the research for Lady of the Dunes because we were doing the other 2, but there's an extra in Jaws that looks a lot like her. And people were like, it's in the same area, it's like a similar beach, it could possibly be her. That still is not necessarily disproven. And her identity, in a weird way, has opened up like more questions.
It's closed a lot of threads and been like, this is definitely not a possibility, this cannot be, but it's also like opened way more doors.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to be talking about the Somerton Man, and Mary is going to talk a bit about the Boy in the Box. So do you want to kick off with Boy in the Box, Mary?
Oh yeah, I can do. This is genuinely one of my favorite kind of you know, historical stories, because we're going to go back in history. This is quite an old mystery, but you were going to want to stay older. Yeah, you were going to want to stay and listen to the entire thing, because yes, we will be revealing again, like Lauren said about the Lady in the Dunes, it's not entirely solved, but we know who the boy is now. But first, let's go all the way back to 1957.
Ooh, we're going way back.
Yeah. Where
I can't believe I was like, oh, we're going way back, when usually we're like in 1794.
Now, yeah, I guess we should have some content warnings. We're going to be discussing murder and death and dead bodies and some kind of violent scenarios.
So possibly child abuse and infanticide. In case you couldn't tell from the name boy in the box.
Yes. So if that's not for you, that's fine. You can step away.
Skip forwards like 10 minutes.
Yeah. But basically in February 1957, the 25th of February, a boy was discovered in a box, dead. And actually he was discovered twice, which I think also adds a little bit to the mystery. So the first discovery, a young man was basically out in the woods near Fox Chase in Philadelphia, and he had laid some traps that he technically shouldn't have put down in the forest. And
he was poaching,
and he was checking his traps, and he found this box, and in the box was the body of a boy. And he decided, I don't want to notify the police because I don't want them to, tell me off for poaching. So he didn't report it, which suspicious. Okay.
Yes. I mean, this is always one of those things in these mysteries where it's like someone sees it and doesn't report it.
Well,
but this is such a common thing.
Well, it happens again. So then a few days later, a student basically sees something in the woods, and he stops his car and he goes and investigates, and he finds the same box with the boy in the box. But he, for whatever reason, decided, I'm also not going to report this. So he goes home. And maybe that would have been it. But he saw on the news, I think he read about another report of a missing child. So the disappearance of then 4-year-old Mary Jane Barker was massive at this time. She'd only just gone missing, and there was a massive missing persons case that garnered like this really big kind of publicity campaign. It was called the largest search in South Jersey. But a few days after, so he saw this on the news, and then thought, what if this body that I've discovered is the body of this girl? So the day after he found the box, he rang the police and he called it in. The body of Mary Jane Barker was discovered on the 3rd of March. So you can see like this box was discovered first in late February. Her body was discovered in March, and it's not an unsolved mystery. It was essentially an accidental death, and very tragic, but not a kind of mystery. Which then, if the body that was discovered is not Mary, like Mary Jane, then who is this boy? So police went and they got this box and this boy, and what they found was a kind of big old cardboard box that had originally been used to store a bassinet. So a kind of like
it's a bassinet is like a baby bed. It's like a baby carrier, baby bed,
where you put your baby to sleep before you get them a real bed. Which is quite ironic that you have this dead child in this box.
And people kind of were like, oh well, it's a child in a bassinet box, like this must mean something. And so that was kind of like big clue number one, and it was from a specific brand, JC Penney's. So they were like, right, we know that this brand is sold at these stores, so that's clue number one. The boy himself was unclothed, but he was wrapped in a blanket, and it was a specific kind of plaid blanket that, again, clue number two that they could use to kind of try and solve this mystery. The boy was about 4 to 6 years old. Because of the time that he had been outside, it was hard to kind of age him, or even kind of determine exactly when he died. But they did know that his hair had recently been cut. Perhaps it had been cut after his death or very close to his death. And there were also like large clumps of hair that were just on
on his body as well. And it was also clear that the boy was very, very clearly like severely malnourished and starved. So
which was one of the reasons they couldn't figure out how old he was as well, because like this was potentially an abused but certainly malnourished child. And you know, I'm sure people know this, if you abuse and don't feed a child, that will very, very negatively affect a child's growth.
Yeah, 100%. And the other things that were suspicious about this kind of discovery was that he had quite a lot of injuries on him as well. So he had several cuts, some on his ankle, some on his groin, and also quite a large cut under his chin. And he also had head injuries. And I think in the post-mortem, they determined that that's how he probably died, from head trauma. But it definitely was not an accident. This boy had not led a happy life. And also, you know, who is he? And that is largely, until last year, nobody really knew any more than that, who the boy was, how he died, or what led up to his deaths. So they took his fingerprints, and that didn't tell them anything. They launched a media campaign, so images of his face were kind of plastered around
there's that really famous kind of like face first and profile like autopsy image that, you know, it is quite upsetting. Don't look it up if that's going to be something that you might find to be upsetting. Like you don't need to look it up to understand this story, but you know, this unnamed child, this unknown child, like this image of him became huge. Like it's like instantly recognizable.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is the thing about unsolved mysteries, is that images can be distressing, but as part of a kind of publicity campaign, they're often used to get information, because you never know what will kind of trigger someone's memory, remembrance of something. The police also went back to the crime scene. They searched it. They found a couple of hats, including a kind of blue corduroy hat, which made them think that potentially someone who had put the boy there, or the box there, was a man. They also found a child's scarf and a handkerchief with the letter G in the corner. Again, these were kind of found near the box, so potentially connected, potentially not. It's all kind of, you know, up in the air. But again, even with all these clues, they still didn't know who the boy was. And since then, the boy has been exhumed twice. So as we said earlier, there have been a lot of technological advances, one of which is the internet, but another one is DNA and kind of genetic profiling. So they exhumed him in 98, I think, but nothing was kind of found, partly because a lot of the databases for DNA aren't as big as they are now. So there just wasn't enough people to match him with. But they did exhume him again in 2019, which has led to the recent discovery, which we will get to when we talk about the mystery getting solved. But before we do, obviously that's quite a lot of time, you know, from the 50s to the 2010s. That's a big chunk of time, and in that time a lot of theories have been developed. A lot of them you know, not as robust as maybe they should have been.
Robust is definitely tenuous would be perhaps the word we would. Fragile.
But I think in the theories, the theories of unsolved mysteries are really interesting, because it really gets to the heart of why we can view these as you know, being gothicized, because these narratives are essentially people trying to solve the puzzle and find a narrative, some of which are salacious and just completely unrealistic, but some of them are grounded in elements of truth. And I think it's that whole STEM versus STEAM thing, isn't it? Like, you can have all of these clues, but what you really need is a kind of coherent narrative to tie them all together. And unfortunately, cases like this do have at the heart of them a really horrible crime. You know, this boy was very ill treated and suffered a very violent death.
Well, it's that kind of thing about, like, when you think about storytelling. So one of you know, like, one of the biggest theories about this is the lady who years later came out and said, like, I think that, like, I was a child, I think that my mother abused this child.
Yes. I'll get to, yeah.
Yes, okay, great.
Yeah,
But like,
I've got my theory.
whether
Yeah.
or not
Yeah.
whether or not they're linked, I'll let you talk about that. But it's like, whether or not they're linked, it's like, but that means if this child isn't this child, it was a different child. And I always think that as well about like the Walter Collins case, so the Changeling, the movie with Angelina Jolie, that's the case that's based on. There's this thing where, like, if you don't acknowledge the story at the heart and the potentiality, you miss this thing where it's like, okay, well, if this mystery isn't this mystery, then there's another mystery. Because if this Jane Doe isn't this person who went missing, then this is someone else that we don't know about. And it's that thing of like that constant like idea about memorialization, about like investigation, that the Gothic really brings to the forefront for things like this. And I think, also humanizes it. Like, there is an element of, there's a crime at the heart of this, there's a person, like, it's not entertainment, but there's a reason that the Gothic as a genre exists, where it's all about terror and crime and awe and awfulness, because it's not necessarily about like getting a kick out of it, as it is about like problem solving and justice and all of these complex human emotions that don't fit necessarily into neat narratives.
And I think a lot of people who have been more intimately involved with the case, so people who worked in the police or in the kind of the medical examiner's office, or the people who were involved in the burial of this boy, have been very kind of attached and moved by the story, and wanting to give the child a proper burial, but also to kind of memorialize him in a way that is appropriate. So there is a kind of gravestone that was created, but because they didn't know who he was,
oh my god,
it was
yes.
unnamed, and he's kind of so he's been given the kind of moniker of America's unknown child. And I think a lot of people, it really gets into people's emotions, wanting to do right by the boy, and to give him not only a proper burial, but also to find out who he is, so that they can put his name on that gravestone. And I think this is part of definitely the people who are intimately connected with the case itself, but also from a bit further removed, but it does kind of, you do get a little bit emotionally kind of connected to this. This poor boy, this poor child, what a horrible life, and maybe in death we can bring him some justice. Let's talk a little bit about the theories quickly.
So I'm not laughing because I was gonna say, that was nervous laughter. That wasn't like, haha, it's so funny.
And again, I think this is why we do need to distinguish between unsolved mysteries and other kinds of elements of true crime, because I think ultimately people are trying to solve, obviously not everyone, but a lot of people are trying to solve these mysteries from that kind of ethical or emotional kind of perspective.
And I think most people that like this like it because it's something that we come together on as like a global community, where it's like, if we know more, we can do more. If we're more aware of these things, if we talk more, if we make it an issue, it's less likely to happen. We're more likely to be able to protect. And part of that is fallacy, but it's something that we need to be able to not lock ourselves in our houses and not go anywhere every day of our lives.
So one theory is that potentially the boy may have been raised as a girl, and this is based solely on the hair which was cut and the hair that was found, and this theory had a little bit of legs, because the police did actually release a photograph of the boy with long hair to see if anyone recognized that picture and that photograph. There isn't really a lot of evidence for that theory, so it does seem to be a little bit kind of superfluous to the story, but that is one of the kind of main theories. And then another one, and I think this is the one that you were alluding to, is there was an individual known as Martha or M, And she basically suggested that her parents bought the boy, and that they then kind of really violently beat the boy while he was alive until he died, and then just buried him and left him in the woods. And this is really difficult, because I think this woman is a kind of psychiatric patient, and she has a history of mental illness, and people have investigated her suggestions. Some of the things that she said do kind of bear out, but then there's also some that don't. So it's not exactly, she's 100% making it up, but it also, the police have ruled it out. But one thing that is interesting is that there was another kind of theory where somebody else said that he knew that the boy because the boy was sold by his father, which is, if you have watched the BuzzFeed Unsolved episode of The Boy in the Box, Ryan has a kind of moment where he's like,
have I solved the mystery?
Have I solved the mystery? Because I will say, it is strange that you have two kind of independent people coming out and saying, my parents bought this boy and my parents sold a boy. But again, it's like what you said, maybe there are more mysteries here, and maybe there are, people that have bought and sold children, but they're unconnected to this boy, or maybe it is connected.
And other unsolved mysteries show, like the Watercolors case, show that people were doing shady shit like this, like selling children or sending a child with an uncle for the purpose of working, or that there is an issue here.
It's not beyond the realms of the possible, but at the moment it is just a theory, and it hasn't been ruled to be likely, I guess. So the other theory that I want to talk about involves the fostering of the boy to a kind of foster child. And this kind of house, this foster home, would have been quite near to the site that the boy was discovered. And basically people linked the bassinet to a specific kind of store, and they found a set number of people, and these people were investigated. And one of the people was a foster family who had this kind of bassinet and would have had this box. And basically this part of the discovery and this part of the investigation was led by a former employee of the medical examiner, and who basically, and this is what I mean when I say like people close to the cases, they stick with them. He was part of the initial discovery and then went out of his way to chase down and keep on this case, and he basically investigated this case, this unsolved mystery, but specifically this thread, for about 30 years until he died. So his name is Remington Bristow, and he carried a mask of the boy's face.
I've forgotten about this detail, because I found that they made a death mask of him to show to people,
and he had it and he carried it around with him, and he would show it to people, which I think is a little bit weird.
I think that's too far. I mean, I get that it's the 50s, but like photographs and drawings exist.
He also contacted a psychic, because this is of course what you would do,
obviously.
And this psychic led him to this specific foster home that again did have connections to that specific bassinet, but again that's just kind of circumstantial. And this theory basically involves that one of the workers, the stepfather in this foster home had a stepdaughter, and that maybe that somehow a baby was involved, potentially because the stepdaughter had a child out of wedlock, or maybe they fostered a child from this care home, and they tried to hide the pregnancy, or they tried to hide the baby, or maybe the baby that they fostered died, and so they abandoned the baby. There is no evidence of this kind of pair, stepfather and stepdaughter, having a baby. in this way, or abandoning that the timelines don't work out, there's no evidence, so it has essentially been ruled out. But one interesting thing about this is that when they were contacted, the stepfather and the stepdaughter are now married. So I mean, it's not incest technically, as I think Ryan and Shane have said, but I think it's a little bit.
Don't like it.
I don't like it either.
I don't like it.
No,
I don't think you should be marrying anyone that you have parented in any way. I think it's weird. I don't like it. Very Gothic though.
Well, yeah, which is why I left that bit in. But you can see how, like, all the kinds of theories, some of them are based in things that are true, some of them use facts and real things that happen, but also sometimes they do get carried out away, and
it shows like how people gothicize these real events, because it's like, well, if a child is found in a box in the woods, then all of these horrendous things that you think only happen in novels could be possible. Like, why would you go to those things? Why would you do that? And I think, you know, you do get a lot of those slightly more fringe theories sometimes that speak to like another horrible thing having happened. But I still don't like that they, I was going to say not to judge, but I do judge. I judge it harshly.
It's weird.
I don't like it.
But as we said, this is partially solved. We don't know exactly how the boy died. We don't know the circumstances of his death, but we do know who he is. So as a result of the recent exhumation of his body, he's been identified as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. So again, the boy in the box now has a name, and I think they are currently trying to put the name on the gravestone. But Joseph was identified because of genealogy testing, and they managed to match him with a second cousin, and from then they've managed to kind of work out the family tree. And his birth parents are dead, but he still has some half siblings that are still alive. So the mystery of who is the boy in the box has been solved, but the mystery of why was the boy in the box
because
still goes on.
I don't know if this is still the case, but when they first figured out who he was, he doesn't have a social security number, there's no record of his birth. Now, yes, this is the 50s, those things do happen, and I don't want to say, oh, this is for sure, because again, this was all, you know, the information that just came out, and this came out 2 months ago. This is all it was very, very
literally new. November of 2022.
This is all very, very new information, which is why we wanted to do this episode now, because we were messaging each other like, oh my god, and these all happened in quick succession. We were like, oh my god, the boy in the box has been solved, oh my god, the lady of the dunes has been solved. But it hasn't, because this child was not recorded. The Zarellis apparently were quite a prominent family. And it's that thing of like, well, how did, you know, why was this child, it could be innocent because it's the 50s, but it also, this boy ends up in this box. So I mean, it is like,
this boy did not have a good life. So
no, like how long he didn't have a good life for is unclear. But
the circumstances
of his abused child.
Yeah, the circumstances of his death are not good.
No,
but
and it's like, was he kidnapped? Was he out? Yeah, you know, was it like a, you know, secret pregnancy? Was it? There's all of these things, and obviously because the birth parents are dead, you know, but they never reported him missing, which is one of the reasons why, like, suspicious. That was never a theory, because they never reported him missing, which is just.
So one of the takeaways from this story, I think, is that if you have a family member that has gone missing, report them as missing. And if you are out in the woods and you discover a boy in the box or just any dead body, just, you know, phone the police, report that. You know.
You probably will be the first suspect, but you know, hopefully not for long, unless you're doing shady shit, which stop doing shady shit.
I think it's more suspicious if you don't report it.
So the second case we're going to talk about, the Somerton Man, has also been linked because of genealogical data. And what's really interesting about this one is that they have been trying with this one for a while, and they thought they had solved it because of certain physical characteristics that have now been disproven because we have actual DNA. So the case of the Somerton Man is one of the world's favorite conspiracy theories, unsolved mysteries, because it has potential links to things like the Cold War, spies, all that shit that everybody loves. So on the 1st of December 1948, the body of a man was found on Somerton Beach, hence the name Somerton Man, which is in Adelaide, South Australia. And I remember the first time I heard this, I was like, wow, 1st of December on the beach. And then I realized it's in South Australia and literally the height of summer. And this case is very interesting because not only of the way that the body was found, but also the circumstances around it. So all of the labels and all of the identifying markers. So as we were talking about with the boy in the box, what would happen if a body was found, a Jane Doe or a John Doe, an unknown body? Where did he buy his shirt? Where did he buy his shoes? Are they, can we figure out where he might have bought those from? Did someone see someone buying, this specific hat or this specific raincoat? Where are they sold? Anything like that had been cut out, which is always instantly makes people go, spies. But of course, if in the like in the 40s, if you're like, so it's like 1948, if you're like, I want people to be suspicious. I want, if you're just like, I don't want people to know who I am, because you're just dramatic like that, you probably would have also done it. But yeah, all of the identifying information was gone essentially. So when they first find him, another one of those as well, where a couple of people walked past him and didn't report anything, partially because they thought he was sleeping, and it's possible that the first people to see him saw him alive.
People also don't like to get involved. People are very unwilling to get involved in other people's business, or especially if you think that man's just sleeping, I'll leave him alone.
And there's this one couple that walked past like the night before, and they said they saw him raise an arm and then drop it, and they were like, oh, okay, cool, he's fine, he's chilling, he's on the beach. And again, I guess like seeing a man fully clothed lying on the beach, if it's the height of summer in southern Australia, is not the weirdest thing necessarily.
I also will say that, given all we know about how memory is not as reliable as we think that it is, and this was a couple, what might have happened is that maybe one of the couple was like, we should go and check on the man, and then the other person is like, no, it's fine, I saw him raise an arm. Maybe you think that you saw that, and over time you so maybe he did, maybe he didn't, we'll just never know.
And there's another set of witnesses that came forward in the 50s and said they saw a well-dressed man carrying another man. Lots of people were like, oh yeah, I saw him sleeping, didn't think to investigate any further. So even at the very start of this story, there's all of this weirdness, all of this like strangeness essentially, because multiple people see this man. Some say, oh, I didn't see him move. Some say they did. Some see, so it's like, well, was he carried to the beach dead? Did he commit suicide on the beach? Did he take his own life? There's all of this weirdness right from the very beginning. What also is weird is that when they do the autopsy and they start kind of like looking in, at first they don't find any poison or anything like that, and then obviously as things go, this is another one where they first do stuff, it's like, can't find anything weird. He ate a pasty, like a Cornish pasty or something, well, not Cornish because it's Australia, but you know what I mean, could have been imported, but like he ate something, and they're like, we don't really know anything else because technology is not that advanced. So it's like, well, did he kill himself? There's no wounds on this body. But then what also happens is they find not only a suitcase with some things in it that they are fairly sure belonged to this guy, and they figure out where he was staying. Doesn't give them any identifying information. Inside his pocket, they find like a rolled up piece of paper that says the words. I'm not going to try and say what they actually say, but basically it's the Persian phrase meaning it's over, or it's finished, or it's done. And it's from, let me try it. Tamam Shud, I think, is how you say it. And it's from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khan, which is like a 12th century poet, which sometimes when you hear reporting on this, they're like, this book was super rare, it was super rare. Other times people are like, no, actually it had just become more popular and it wouldn't have been that difficult to get a copy. But then what also happens is someone had parked their car with the window open, and a few days later they find a copy in their back seat with that bit missing. So there's all of this weird stuff that goes around it. The fascinating
but that's
thing,
also like, but how did it get out? How did it get out of the car? Or how did it get out of the book in your car? And how did it get rolled up? Like, there's just so
like who threw it in the back window of the car, or why did they throw it? Like, or did you find it in your car? Are you lying? Like, has someone given it to you? Like, there's all of this very weird stuff. So from the very beginning with this one, as soon as they find it, they are like, people are like, spy shit. This guy is a government agent, because a lot of people said he looked like he could be British. They didn't think he looked Australian.
How could you tell that? Surely, I mean, I say this as a white person, but like, surely like white people all just look the same. Like, you know, I find it really difficult when I'm watching films and there's like 4 or 5 white men with brown hair. I'm like, who is, I don't know. You like,
who are you?
Yeah, who are you? Like, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna say that saying that this man looked British and not Australian is ridiculous.
I mean, I guess maybe he wasn't tanned, like it's the height of summer, and
maybe the teeth, bad teeth.
Maybe, yeah, bad teeth. And I feel like that's like more like he's not Australian, like, oh yeah, like there's all of this weird stuff. And then later on they find, I believe it's digitalis, which is a very deadly poison, and not something that you can buy on the shelves, but it is something you can get quite easily from like plants and stuff like that. And they did not so this is part of it, they didn't say that it was digitalis, because digitalis is very, very deadly. And whilst you can't buy it, you can easily obtain it and make it. And I believe it comes from certain plants. Again, I'm not a botanist, I don't know. But basically that then caused more suspicion, it caused more uproar. People were like, yeah, either someone drugged him or he drugged himself, and you know, that's why he was waiting to be found, and that's, you know, that it's over the Tamam Shud, like it's very specific. So for years and years there were lots of stories about, you know, did he poison himself, did someone else poison him, was he carried there, did he take his own life there and complete suicide there, you know, is there some kind of code? And this is at the height of, you know, we're post World War II.
I will say, like, if he is or was actually a spy, we will probably never know.
We'll never know.
No, because governments
will never know.
You know, governments are very good at keeping that kind of stuff hush. I mean, this is very off topic, but like, I'm just thinking about like Prince Philip's will and the fact that it's been like embargoed or like hidden for like 100 years, and it's like, if you're putting that much effort into hiding like the will of some old like monarch or like consort or whatever, how much more effort are you putting into hiding the actual identities of your spies and actually all of that kind of top secret, like, you know, confidential times 1,000 stuff? Like, we'll just never know if he was or wasn't a spy.
No, and like there's this whole thing. So in this copy of this book, supposedly found in this car, there's also a potential code. There's a series of numbers and series of letters. No one, as far as I know, has been able to crack it. And that has just fueled this idea that he was a spy. But also, people are paranoid. Like, and I will say this too, that this is a period after World War II in Australia, ergo very close to Japan, very close to nuclear testing, very close to atomic bombs. This is a period where, you know, we're at the beginnings of the Cold War. We've got Korea and Vietnam happening. this is a time where people were very suspicious,
Mm.
very paranoid, and not necessarily without good reason. So there also is the potential that he wasn't a spy at all. He was just a very paranoid man and he thought people were after him. But what is really fascinating about this one is that, so the Somerton Man had like very specific calf muscles that led people to think he might have been a ballet dancer.
Mm-hmm.
And this then has led to a theory that I'm not going to go into because it's very long, it's very complicated. And until the DNA evidence came out, I have to say I found it very believable. And we could do a whole episode on this theory of but essentially a woman came forwards and said that she thought her mother may have known the Somerton Man. When police went over, so for various reasons she was interviewed, and when they showed her a picture of him, she seemed like really shocked and she wouldn't talk about it. So there's this whole theory that this woman called Jo Thompson, who was a nurse, had potentially been connected. Her daughter said she had heard her talking Russian on the phone, or she didn't know how her mother knew Russian. And someone so I can't remember the investigator's name, and I don't know why I didn't write it down. That was really stupid of me. But essentially, the investigator who had this theory that he was a ballet dancer, potentially a Russian ballet dancer, potentially a spy, potentially Jo Thompson's a sleeper agent, that they either were working together or they'd had a relationship, because Jo Thompson had a son who was also a ballet dancer, who had these physical characteristics that were very similar to the Somerton Man, and they were like, yeah, it's not common, so they could totally be related. And is it Robin? So Robin is the son who was the ballet dancer. I think it's his daughter, isn't it? When the investigator came over to do this DNA testing, do this genetic testing, to look into this stuff, they fell in love. So the granddaughter of this possible connection and the investigator are now married.
That's so nice.
And this was this whole thing where it was like,
and it's what everyone wants, right? From in whatever way it happens, people want a happy ending. So
yeah. And it's kind of like, well, isn't that the thing that happens in Gothic novels?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what happens. And I'm going through this quickly because I don't want to make the episode super long, so forgive me for my slightly hazy research, people. But also this is a really common case, and I was like, people don't want to hear me say the same facts about the Somerton Man that we've heard on 6 million other podcasts.
Yeah, you can go and find out about the Somerton Man by watching BuzzFeed Unsolved. But what we're specifically talking about is why it's Gothic.
Yes,
and I think that that kind of happenstance where people be falling in love,
yes. So this is something that happens all the time. You have this in, for example, A by Its Possession. Two people looking into this historical literary mystery fall in love. She turns out to be the descendant of the person they're looking into. We have this again in the Gothic where, the investigator falls in love with the daughter or the niece of the victim or the criminal or whoever it may be. This is Blade Runner, this is The Woman in White, this is so many Gothic texts. And we always kind of think, oh, well, that's not real, or that's not believable, but we have that happening in real life with these people. And people have been like, was that ethical? Did he really fall in love with her, or did he charm her? No, I don't want to comment. These people are married. They seem very happy. I don't want to comment. But there's all of this stuff that because it's happening in real life, people feel like they can comment on it because their relationship has become part of the Somerton Man mystery. But genealogical testing, because of people, and this is the thing that just to finish off, that is so fascinating. It's so interesting that our fascination with legacy and lineage has brought us to this point where we are all putting our data, our genetic data, on the internet, essentially, in these databases. And that means that so this is how the Golden State Killer was caught, because when they then tested, I mean, that was partially because, you know, his DNA matched up with the DNA if he'd been arrested for something else. But we suddenly have this situation where, Derek Abbott, that was the name of the investigator. But yeah, we suddenly have this thing where it's like, oh, okay, we, you know, we're so interested in who we are and where we came from that we're finding murderers, we're finding serial killers, we're finding unsolved mysteries. Obsession with lineage and who we are and where we came from is one of the foundational aspects of the Gothic.
Yeah.
And I just think it's something that I never considered when things like ancestry started to become a thing. I was like, yeah, this is very Gothic. It's very, you know, family mysteries, family timelines, like, you know, people discovering they are related to, you know, victims of the Salem witch crimes and then deciding to write novels about like that. That is something that we kind of know is very Gothic. But the fact that our obsession with knowing who we are and where we came from is leading to these discoveries. So the Somerton Man has been revealed to be a guy called Carl Webb. They still don't know much about him, but relatives and friends have said, like, towards the end of his of like the last time they saw him, he seemed to be mentally unstable, which again would lead to, that's why I kept saying, like, he could have just been paranoid, he could have been, you know, unwell, but he also could have been a spy. They could have thought he was mentally unstable because he was a spy and he was doing stuff. And, you know, there's all of this kind of stuff. The coded message could be horse names, like it could be because he was gambling.
But
like,
it's you know, it's quite common that people who are going under paranoid delusions think that they are involved in, you know, either as the subjects of or the investigators of some kind of, you know,
exactly,
criminal or government conspiracy, spy network, that kind of thing. So it's, you know, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that maybe his paranoid delusions led to the specific clues, or and maybe it was just something else. And you know,
and I believe, again, this is all very new and I don't know how much of this information is substantiated, but he was Australian but had been in the US and then had come back to Australia.
Can I just say again on my thing, like, how can you say that someone just looks British? This is just kind of
also because, like, a lot of white Australians were not that many generations, like, you know, Australian at this point in time. Like, we're talking about the 50s. Colonialism, you guys, once again, we're back on colonialism. But yeah, like, we now know who Carl Webb is, why he was back in Australia, why these things happened. Was there any connection to Joe Thompson? Because the Robin connection could be completely, it could just be completely like and circumstantial.
That wasn't his son, right?
Not his son. No, there's no genetic evidence.
But what's really interesting though is that it doesn't disprove the fact that he potentially had a relationship with the mother. Because, you know, not every kind of romantic or sexual encounter is going to lead to children.
So there's still potential that these two people were connected, that he was a spy, that there was some elements of things. But maybe so this is the weird thing. That could still be true, even though they are not genetically related. Abbott could still be right. It's just that it didn't produce a child. So yeah, DNA. Like, one, wild. But two, the fact that we are still so obsessed with who we are, where we came from, how many generations we were, and particularly, you know, people in post-colonial places like Australia and the US, you know, it is less popular in Britain, although it's still very popular, because it is like, well, where did I come from? Who am I? 23andMe, you know, 23andMe has been absolutely huge, and I would love to just do an episode on 23andMe because, oh my god, so many people have realized that they have married relations. And I genuinely, like, that has become a fear, like an irrational fear for me. Like, I'm fairly sure that there's nothing like suspicious in my family like that, but it's happened so many times. Can you imagine getting a 23andMe result and being like, why do we match? Like, we're married.
I mean, I think Yeah, and maybe we'll do this in a future episode, maybe we won't, but I think there was that there's been so many documentaries about doctors who are like run infertility clinics and
our
have basically
father.
been, that's the one that I'm thinking of, and there's been a couple of really high profile cases like that, and for me, like, one of the horrifying things about those real stories is the fact that, yes, you could be walking around the town and just being like, is one of these people my sibling,
my
and I just don't know.
Oh,
it's horrifying.
terrifying.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's why even when they're solved, unsolved mysteries, not only on Gothic, but I think that's why we're so fascinated by them, and like, they do become fixations. That's the other thing as well. Like, people become obsessed. The D.B. Cooper documentary, the guy who is so adamant on proving his theory, it's almost like a monomania. Like, if Poe was alive today, he would probably write a story about someone obsessed with their conspiracy theory or obsessed with their true crime theory, because it becomes this like all-encompassing part of people's lives, and we're all invested in who the boy in the box is, and who the Somerton Man is, and who the Lady of the Dunes is. And whether or not there's something that, especially with like the Somerton Man, have we all been lied to? Was he a spy? Was this some kind of government conspiracy? Is this some weird Cold War stuff? And again, this is why one of the reasons I love Mothman so much, because it's like coming out of that, post-war fear and that anxiety and that paranoia.
Yeah.
But it's also like, it's so satisfying to know that, to be reassured that like there is a possibility and an answer. And I think that's the other thing about like the Gothic, is it's like at the end there's an answer. If you go through the terror and you go through the hardship, you get the answer at the end. And obviously life's not like that most of the time, but that doesn't mean that possibility is not there, and therefore not worth striving for. Which, I'm not going to get deep here, but I think that's why the Gothic is so comforting. People sometimes think of the Gothic as being just horror and terror, but there's a lot of comfort to be found in the Gothic. And I think for a lot of people, unsolved mysteries have a comfort to them, because the truth is possible. The truth is potential. And I think we'll talk about this more when we talk about true crime, because guess what, you guys? This is going to be a little mini series. We have kicked off today with unsolved mysteries. We're going to talk about true crime. We're going to talk about horror movies and horror genre that's inspired by real life. And we are also going to talk about, oh my God, I've forgotten the last one.
It'll be a surprise. It'll be a bonus. Yeah, but I mean,
it's in the notes.
I know what it is, but I think, stay tuned. Watch the episode.
We'll save it.
We'll announce it at the end of next episode.
Oh yeah, good idea.
Yeah, so next week, yes, we are going to be delving into, well, I say next week, actually, not next week. Next episode, we will be delving into the kind of Gothic elements of true crime, and also delving into the ethics of that specifically, because I think that true crime is slightly different to unsolved mysteries, and there is a very dark side of the kind of interest in true crime, and
fandom,
also
shall we say,
the fandom, and also the kind of salaciousness that I think we should look into. And we'll be kind of exploring some of the ethicalness, the icks, and just the Gothic kind of side of the intersection of Gothic and true crime, and Gothic in real life, I guess. So stay tuned.
Yeah, we got more coming. But in the meantime, stay safe and stay spooky.
And if you like this episode, hit that like button, subscribe.
Yeah, we got a Ko-fi, we got a YouTube, we're on Instagram. You can find us up on all your spaces and places. Not in a weird way.
Do leave us a comment if you enjoy this episode. We love hearing from you. And until next time, as Lauren said, stay safe and stay spooky.
Bye.